everybody. Today we're going to be making a pinch pot bird, and we're going to do this in a really fun way. For this project, you're going to need a placemat to keep your workspace clean, some kiln firing clay, although air dry clay will work really well as well if you don't have access to kiln fired clay. You're also going to want a little cup of water and a toothpick or some sort of scratching tool also. Let's get started. All right, first step is we're going to take our ball of clay and we're actually going to take a tiny chunk of it off so that we have a little bit left over to do some features like a beak and some eyeballs and things like that for our bird. We just need a little tiny chunk. So I'm just going to set that aside. I'm going to take the majority of the rest of my clay and I'm going to roll it into a ball shape. What we're going to be doing is creating a pinch pot, and it's a very old technique that people have been doing for thousands of years, but it always starts with a ball. So you're going to make sure your clay is a pretty nice ball shape. Does not have to be 100% perfect, just a pretty good shape. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the more you touch clay, the drier it gets. So my touching it with my hands is actually drying it out. So my fingers are absorbing the moisture from the clay, and that means I don't want to touch it too much. So I want to touch it just enough to get it what I want it to do, but not too much so that I dry it out. All right, once you have a ball of clay, you're going to, step one, take your thumb and push it into the clay. This might take a little bit of pressure. It depends on how stiff and hard your clay is, or if it's a super soft clay. So sometimes it might take a little muscle, but you want to push your thumb in. Now, not through it. We're not going through the other side. We're just pushing it into it, okay? Next step is we're going to create a pinching motion. So I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to be doing this with my clay, but I'm going to be doing it with my thumb on the inside and my fingers on the outside, and I'm going to be squeezing with my fingers. So you can see how this part of the clay squished down because I squeezed it. And I'm going to turn and squeeze and turn and squeeze and turn and squeeze. So I'm turning and pinching every single time, and the opening is getting wider and wider, and it's starting to get a little bit of a bowl shape. Once your opening is large enough to accommodate 2 thumbs, we're going to do the same pinching, but this time with both hands. So you might not be able to see what I'm doing, but my thumbs are on the inside, my hands are on the outside, and I'm going to be squeezing and pinching. And my goal at this point is to do gentle little squeezes, small squeezes near the bottom and up near the top, so that I can make sure that the thickness in between is the same all the way up and all the way around. So feel between your fingers. This takes some practice. Feel between your fingers where it feels thick and where it feels thin. If it feels thin, we don't want to pinch there. But if it feels thick, we do want to pinch in those spots. So I'm going to keep pinching and turning until I have a nice round shape. Okay? Now you might notice at this point, once you have a nice round shape, that there are some cracks that have developed. Again, that's because when I'm touching it, I'm drawing it out with my hands. So that's why we don't want to touch it too much. So you're going to see some cracks starting to form. So what we're going to do to fix that is use a little bit of water, one little fingertip of water, and I'm going to rub it onto the clay. And I'm going to continue rubbing it onto the clay until the water absorbs into the clay and it gets really smooth. So you can see this area is super smooth and beautiful now, and this area is still pretty cracked. So that's what you want to do. You never want to wet it so much that your clay is super wet and shiny like that. You don't want to leave it like that. If you are putting so much water that it is shiny and wet like that, then that is too much water. Too much water can be just as bad as not enough water, because too much water will turn your clay into mud, and mud we can't do anything with. We can't shape and build things with mud. It just falls apart. So I'm going to spend a little time here smoothing out my rim down here and the surface over here, because this is the side that we're going to be decorating. Okay, once you feel like you smoothed out your clay enough so everything is really smooth and clean looking, now it's time to add some of our details. All we're going to be adding for our bird are 2 eyes and a beak. We're going to be adding feathers and legs and other fun things later using some other special cool materials. So all we need to build out of the clay, out of our extra scrap of clay, are 2 eyes and a beak. First, I'm going to shape the objects that I want to do. So I obviously need 2 lumps of clay that are going to make nice eyeballs, and then 1 lump for the beak. Show you a couple ways that you could be making eyeballs. So first of all, you could just make 2 round balls, and those could be on your sculpture as 2 eyeballs, just like that. After you attach them, you could also just take a toothpick and poke a nice hole in the middle to create a nice opening eyeball. Another way of doing it is creating a circle and then using another lump of clay to make a smaller center, and that can be the inside rather than poking a hole in it. Yet another thing you could do is squish a piece of clay, stick it on top, and that can create almost like an eyelid as well. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. When you're creating a beak, there's also a number of ways you could do it. One is to shape it like a triangle. So we can take our clay and we can pinch it between our fingers on one side and then the other side and continue until we have a nice point. And then we could tap the bottom onto the table so that it flattens out and creates a nice sticking out sort of beak shape. You could simply put the one on, or you could actually get another small piece to attach underneath and create an open mouth type of shape, so that when it gets placed on, your bird has sort of an open mouth look instead. Once you've decided how you're going to be shaping your beak and your eyes, you're going to need to attach them. Now here is a really important part in order to keep your clay pieces stuck together. You need to do something called slip and score. So scoring means to take a toothpick or any other tool and scratch into your clay some texture, some dug in texture. That's called scoring. Then you're going to take a little droplet of water and create a muddy, slippery clay material. This muddy, slippery material is called slip. This acts like glue for clay. So I'm just going to tap some water onto where I scored, and that is going to help my parts stick together permanently. If I don't slip and score, if I don't scratch and add the water, my clay pieces are going to fall apart when they dry, and that isn't very good, whether you're using air dry clay or kiln fire clay. So even if it's a small little thing that you're attaching, like the inside of an eyeball, you still need to scratch, which is scoring, and you still need to add that liquidy, sloppy clay, which is called slip. And I'm doing that by adding a droplet of water, and it's creating a nice slippery mud for me so that my parts will stay together. So no matter how big or small your parts are, you need to do this every time. So when I'm ready to attach my beak now, I have to figure out where it's going to go. I have to scratch, which again is scoring my surface. I need to take some water and rub it on the surface to create this muddy slip material. And then I need to put the two together and push a little bit. Give it a little bit of pressure and push to make sure that it actually is going to stick together really well, so that when it dries, it does not fall apart. time yet you still have some leftover clay, you can either save it and put it back with the rest of the clay that you might have still stored in a bag somewhere and use it for a future project, or you could add some more details. Maybe you want to put a little bow on your bird or a little hat or some other funny little feature. But remember, we're not putting wings or legs on here because we're going to add that at the very end. If you're satisfied with your sculpture and you like the way the eyes and the beak look, the next step before we fire it, which means baking it in the kiln, or before you let it air dry, if you only have air dry clay, is to poke some holes into it. Now these holes could go all the way through, or they could be holes that you just kind of put part way through. So I'm going to, on one side of my bird, take my toothpick and I'm going to put it in a little ways, not all the way through. I'm choosing not to go all the way through, but you could. And I'm going to twist it and turn it like this. That helps create a bigger opening for my hole. I'm going to do that on one side and the same on the other side. If you poke it all the way through, this is what it would look like going all the way through it. So one on one side, one on the other side. This is where we're going to put the feathers to create the wings of our bird. If you would like, and you didn't already put a hat or some other fun detail on the top, you can also put a hole or an indentation on the top. That'll be for a feather to come out of the top of the head. And then lastly, right on either side of the beak, we're going to put 2 more holes. This is where the legs are going to come out of. It might look a little funny right now, but I promise once we get things put inside, it's going to all make sense. After you've added your holes, it's just time to let it dry so that we can paint it and assemble our bird parts.